What's up, everyone? How you doing? Hope you're good. Hope you're well. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. My name is Dwayne, and today I'm going to be checking out Coleman Hughes, some of the views that he has made with regards to reparations, things he said in the past and things he said recently. So let's get straight into it.
Black people don't need another apology. We need safer neighborhoods and better schools. We need a less punitive criminal justice system. We need affordable health care. And none of these things can be achieved through reparations for slavery. And the obligation of citizenship is not transactional. It's not contingent on ancestry. It never expires, and it can't be paid off. For all these reasons, Bill H.R. 40 is a moral and political mistake. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say right there, it's like this only happens with Black people. Here is a hearing, H.R. 40. It's a hearing on reparations. And at the hearing, we have some Black person coming to give his reasons why reparations should not be given to Black people. I mean, I don't think you would see this if it was like the Jewish people coming to Congress, to give their whole take on why they need reparations for, let's just say, the Holocaust or whatever. I just can't believe that there'll be another Jewish person there sitting there saying that, no, they shouldn't get anything. They shouldn't get nothing. This is only Black people. We are our own worst enemy. I'm telling you, man. So here's this guy coming now on the floor to say we shouldn't get it. And all that does is that it delays reparations, because it gives the power structure an excuse to say, we'll side with Coleman. He's Black. We'll side with him. We'll give him a lot of attention to dampen this reparations talk, get it off the table.
Coleman, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get started right away with this question of opposing the idea of reparations. You talk about it as a moral mistake as well as a political mistake. What's the moral mistake here?
The moral mistake is that obviously when the victims of a historical crime are still alive, there is a moral obligation of the perpetrators to pay reparations. When we're talking about, so for instance, it would be a morally necessary, in my opinion, as I said at the hearing, to pay reparations for Jim Crow to survivors of the Jim Crow system. Now, on the other hand, when you're talking about the median Black American being around 35 years old or so, born in the 80s, is there a moral obligation to take money from one group of people and give it to that person for a crime that happened 200 years ago? That's a very different situation, and one in which you have to consider whether it's politically wise to do that, whether it actually serves the interests of the community that is suffering from many different problems in the present that need to be solved. To frame that solution as reparations, saying essentially blaming a group of people that don't feel connected to the crime because it was so long ago, right? So that's what I mean by a moral and political mistake.
Okay, so that's, for me now, there is this thing where people are saying that, slavery happened 200 years ago, as he's saying. Most people who are alive today they're so far removed from it. And look, ladies and gentlemen, this is an argument that does not hold water. This is bullshit. All right? Straight up and down. Okay? First of all, slavery officially ended in 1865. However, it did not mean that the oppression, subjugation, marginalization of Black people did not continue. It did. It continued in the form of the Black Codes. It continued in the form of sharecropping. It continued in the form of convict leasing. It continued in the form of Jim Crow as he mentioned, he even said that, oh, maybe for Jim Crow, we can get some reparations because a lot of people who are alive today or their children are alive today of people who were affected by Jim Crow. So he agrees with Jim Crow, okay? But Jim Crow is a continuation, just like all these things I've labeled: black codes, sharecropping, convict leasing, criminality, criminalizing black people in general, right? That's what the black codes did. Jim Crow, legal segregation, right up until the 1960s, you have policies in place that are a continuation based on the legacy of slavery. Understand.
But the closer you are to the crime, the more plausible and morally required it is to give somebody reparations. And you always have to take into account the other side of the equation here, right? If my grandfather does something to if your grandfather did something horrible to my grandfather, I couldn't necessarily come to you and expect you to pay me directly, right? That would be immoral. So obviously, the closer you are to the crime, you're exactly right. The more necessary, the more morally required it is, and it's a damn shame that reparations were not paid to recently freed slaves and their children. Unfortunately, it is a different situation we're dealing with today, and you can't. It's not that just because reparations were due and never paid for a historical crime does not necessarily mean that the great great grandchildren, say, can demand of the great great grandchildren of the perpetrators that you pay me now. It's tragic, but a multiracial society with a history like we do cannot survive if the principle we're gonna abide by is we're not only solving our crimes, but we're trying to solve all of the crimes of history and
And this is why it's important that young people who come up in the world today know history, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't be saying the nonsense that he's saying. Now, what I give him credit for is that he admits that reparations were not paid and should have been paid to the newly freed slaves in 1865, and it was not.
and it's a damn shame that reparations were not paid to recently freed slaves and their children.
Okay, so that's a very important point to understand. Number one, reparations were not paid, and they should have been paid, and he told you that. And this is why the children of the freed slaves and their great grandchildren, etc., that's why they're still hopping on it, because it was not paid and it is owed. The other thing he mentioned is that I can't go to your grandfather. If my grandfather did something to your grandfather, I can't go to you and get you to pay. First of all, this is not about individual grandfather, father, son, and all that type of nonsense. This is about a systemic system that was put into place to disadvantage a specific racial group in this country. And they were forced to work without wages. That is a sin. And that has to be atoned for. And this is what Black Americans are trying to get uh, uh, the broader society to understand. This has to be atoned for. You can't, this is not gonna, it's easy for the broader society or non-Black Americans to want to forget about slavery because you come from the race of people that were perpetrating it. So it's easy that you want to forget about it. But what about the children and grandchildren who heard the stories and it was passed down to them and all that type of thing? They're not going to easily forget it. They're going to remember their ancestors and what their ancestors went through and the sacrifices that their ancestors made in order for us to be, to be free. And that sacrifice was, of course, Blacks fighting in the Civil War and fighting on the winning team, by the way. I'm going to go deeper into this on other videos. I don't want to talk and preach too much, but I just want to just say that this is what is destroying the reparations movement. People like Coleman Hughes and his views on reparations. Now, let me see. Coleman went on The View
I should ask you to do is explain to folks what you mean by this. Arguments for a colorblind America. What do you mean when you say that?
So a lot of people equate colorblindness to I don't see race or to pretending not to see race. I
That's
think
what
that's
it
a big
means.
mistake. We all see race, right? And we're all capable of being racially biased, so we should all be self-aware to that possibility. My argument is not for that. My argument is that we should try our very best to treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and our public policy.
Of course.
And the reason I wrote this book, thank you. The reason I wrote this book is because in the past 10 years, it has become very popular to, in the name of anti-racism, teach a kind of philosophy to our children and in general that says your race is everything, right? And I think that is the wrong way to fight racism, and that's why I wrote this book at this time.
I'm sorry, baby. Yeah. Can I just point out that there is a reason.
By the way, I'm not a great fan of the ladies on The View. You know, I think a lot of times they are on the wrong end of these things. But in this particular one, you know, I agree with them. You know, Coleman Hughes has to get some pushback because, first of all, why use the term color? Okay, I'm not even going to go there. But nobody has a problem with us moving forward, trying to have a colorblind society where race doesn't come into things and everybody is judged on the content of their character and on their merits and all that. Nobody disagrees with that moving forward. However, there is a past injustice that is still due, and we have to address it. It has to be addressed. It cannot be ignored. It is too fundamental in this country, in the United States of America, right? It is too fundamental to be ignored. I don't care if 500 years passes, because you know, it's easy to say, oh, 200 years passed, but Black people have been talking about reparations from 1865 to 1900s to 1920s, and nothing has been done because there's always been excuses all those times. And now we're up 200 years, and now you say, all right, 200 years is too much.
Parts of the country, right? We have very different cultures all living together in one country, so I'm not going to deny that, but I view this notion of a colorblind society similar to the idea of a peaceful society, which is to say it's an ideal, it's a North Star, and the point is not that we're ever going to get there, we're not going to touch it, but we have to know when we're going forward.
Oh, we're never going to get there. Now, let's move on, because I think he's starting to talk a lot of, you know, I would say caca. Okay, but I want to go into this point. Really, this video, I really wanted to focus on this issue of slavery was 200 years ago. And I'm trying to close that gap in the minds of particularly Black people so that they understand. I think a lot of us do. Most Black Americans support reparations, but there's that small percentage that Coleman represents that I think is making it even more difficult to get reparations. Look, the truth of the matter is we know it's going to be tough to get reparations because, like I've always said in my videos, most non-Black Americans do not support reparations, okay, for Black Americans, okay? So that's going to be an uphill battle. But when you have Black people themselves coming out and making statements like this, that makes it even more harder, because now white people can hide behind them and say, oh, look, but your brother doesn't think it happened 200 years ago. You know, this is a big thing. And this is the big argument, right? If we check out your boy, Mitch McConnell, right? If I do Mitch McConnell, slavery, listen to what he says. Same thing as Cole, right? Check this out.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've, tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but
if we had elected Louis Farrakhan or Khalid Abdul Muhammad or Malcolm X, then we would have definitely gotten beyond this whole issue of racism. You know, Barack Obama, come on, man. You know, it's just because the guy is black or half black, he's using that as a reason. Hey, she reelected. No, it's you guys are always talking about. When I say you guys, I mean the conservatives. They're always talking about how the left always does identity politics, right? Always saying the first black so and so, we're gonna elect a black mayor, we're gonna elect a black. You're doing the same thing. Oh, look, yeah, look, we elected a black person just because the person is black.
No one currently alive was responsible
No one was
for
responsible.
that. And I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it'd be pretty hard to figure out who to compensate.
It will not be hard to figure out who to compensate, and I'll take care of that in another video. But you know, there's your boy Mitch McConnell, you know, talking a whole bunch of caca. Anyway, let's go back to this dude here.
Wait, because I want to get to the part of the book.
Okay,
You believe that public policies that address socioeconomic differences would be better at benefiting disadvantaged groups, and that race-based policies often hurt the very people they're trying to help. What are some examples of policies that would be better at reducing racial disparities?
So my overall argument is that class, socioeconomics, is a better proxy for disadvantage. We all want to help the disadvantaged, and the question is, how do we identify them, right? The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way. Right?
They're clapping, but I disagree with that. You can't look at income. You have to look at wealth. You have to look at wealth. And when you look at wealth, then you'll see the racial differences in wealth, right? I have a whole video where I show this, but I can show you some more now. Here's the population of national wealth, right? This is not income, folks. Okay, even though there are disparities in income, of course, in this country, but wealth, because wealth is the true sign of how a people are doing. And as you can see, the green line there is the population of African Americans, and the black line at the bottom there, you can see, is the percentage of wealth in the country. And as you can see, from 1860 to 2020, I mean, it's gone up by what, 1%? And yet we are 12, 13, 14% of the population. Now, some of you may look at this graph and not really see the problem here. If we're 14% of the population or 12% of the population, and we only have 1 or 2% of the wealth, that means Black people are highly dependent upon others for employment and housing. Okay, if you look, highly dependent, because ideally you want to be close to your population level in terms of where your wealth is, right? I mean, here is Black unemployment. You can see this just goes from 2010, but even from 2020 now, you can see that Blacks unemployment runs twice as high as whites. And it's the highest in all the groups. Home ownership, as you can see right there, it says the home ownership gap is larger today than in 1960. 1960 was the so-called Great Society, and people feel the Blacks were given everything and all the opportunities, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and what has been the result? The result has been the home ownership gap is larger today than it was in 1960. Okay? And you can just go on and on. This shows that basically the 400 richest billionaires own more of the US wealth than every single Black household in America. Okay, this was done in around 2019. This is a very interesting lady. Listen to what she has to say here about South Africa. And I bring South Africa because South Africa is kind of close to America in terms of they had the apartheid system, the black-white thing, an apartheid system. It's more recent in terms of when that ended in 1994. And listen to what she says now in 2024. Okay.
The discussion forward on the racial aspects of the July 2021 unrest. Ayanda, good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. The SAHRC report says a large portion of the black population in KwaZulu-Natal, in places like Phoenix, Khan Road Corner, Verulam, Chatsworth, Montclair, were attacked and targeted because of their race, and further says it was fueled by stereotypes and misinformation disseminated by social media and a generalized notion of a swart gevaar, a danger posed by black people. How do these types of biases become so rooted and become so incendiary?
Well, I think, it all goes back to history. So we know that in South Africa, there was a hierarchy of humanity, which said that the white man was at the top, followed by the Indian man, then the colored man, and then right at the bottom, you have the black African. And so these hierarchies didn't die because apartheid and the legal system that, built this infrastructure died. And so what
You heard that? In other words, the South Africans have long realized, I was going to say they're just realizing, but they've long realized that even though they got their freedom in 1994, they're still dealing with what? The legacy of that apartheid system. Okay? And that was 30 years ago. So they're 30 years in, and they're still dealing with it.
What then happens is that you enter a post-apartheid South Africa that hasn't had a conversation about the ways in which all people of color were oppressed and all people of color were excluded from, what white people were able to get. But at the same time, you also haven't had any discussion about the ways in which the oppression that was felt was differentiated by whether you were black or you were Indian or you were colored, because there was a difference in that. And we see this also in the communities. When you look at the size of the houses, when you look at the level of schools, and if you go as far back, there's a slide that I like to use in training, particularly where we look at how much did the apartheid government spend on a white child, an Indian child, a colored child, and a black child. And you see very clearly that there was a big difference of, 100% going to a white child, about 70% going to an Indian child, 40% going to a colored child, and then 10% going to a black child. And all of this permeates where we live, how we live, the resources we're able to get, and continues to this day. Because although we are in a situation where the government in a lot of ways can be argued to be spending equally, these resources that were gathered during apartheid continue to still be held in the white community, continue to still be held in the Indian community, and continue to still be held in the colored community. That's why you'll see, for instance, that the people who have had the most mass migration into other people's neighborhoods are black people who have moved into colored communities and Indian communities and white communities, while everybody else hasn't really moved into the so-called black communities or townships.
And that's the same in the United States. Blacks are the ones who moved into the white neighborhoods, into the white areas, and they're the ones who had to integrate into the dominant society. You see, and the same thing is happening here. The blacks are moving into these areas because these areas are, quote unquote, they have better facilities, better housing, etc., etc. So, and again, she links everything back to the apartheid system. And she starts by saying you have to go back into the history to understand what's going on. And that's all I'm saying here on this thing, And this is my big problem with Coleman. He is absolutely, he's cutting himself off from the history. He's saying it has nothing to do with the problems that we have right now in the United States of America. That's what this man believes. And that is a bold-faced lie.
If I'm understanding you correctly, there actually is no amount of correlation that you would find persuasive enough to support reparations. It's not as if you knew that black people's lives were directly impacted by this, you still would say no to reparations. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would, because even if you admit slavery is the root source of the problem, that doesn't imply necessarily that reparations is going to solve those problems. That's actually a fallacy. So, for example, if reparations were paid today, tomorrow we would still be living in a country, I would argue, that has, unsafe neighborhoods, dysfunctional public schools, poor healthcare. All the problems related to poverty would still exist.
Well, first of all, it would depend on how much reparations were paid out. That would be, but it would not be the same if reparations were paid out, particularly in the manner in which Black Americans, advocates for reparations, have put forward. America would not be the same the next day. It would not be the same as it was today. There would be a lot of Black people who would suddenly have money, who would suddenly have the ability to get themselves out of poverty, get themselves into better schools, perhaps pool their resources. So I think that's ludicrous to say that reparations now, it's true, it will not fix all the problems. And again, it depends on how much reparations were paid. It wouldn't fix all the problems, right? But the whole point of reparations is it's not about fixing all the problems, right? It is about a debt that is owed to Black Americans because they gave their labor without pay for 12 generations. They continued after slavery was abolished. They continued to face oppression, segregation, unequalness from the basis of government programs. And what that has done is that it has created such a wealth gap between whites and Blacks in this country that, quite frankly, even if we do all the things that he's saying that we should do, it's not going to close the wealth gap. If you care about the wealth gap and you want to close it, some form of reparations needs to happen. It's as simple as that.
And we would be left saying, well, whether they were caused by slavery or not, let's be solution oriented. What does it mean to be problem solvers here, right? Rather than to be stuck in the past in this quixotic.
So he's saying, even if you can convince me that slavery, the legacy of slavery is affecting what's going on today, even if you could convince me of that, it's still not going to solve the problems. But it's going to solve something because, reparations are about cash payments. It's going to solve something. It may not eradicate all those problems, but it's going to solve something. That's a lie that it's not going to solve these things, right? What Black people in this country need is money, money, money. It's very simple. This is a capitalist society. You need capital.
Quest to have some kind of moral absolution, right? Some closure that is, in my view, not practical, not in the cards, and not going to do anything to solve the kinds of issues people are waking up with every day.
So there's a few things. I mean, it sounds like you're saying that reparations wouldn't stop or wouldn't fix many of the other problems we have in society. That seems like an odd argument.
Yes. Well,
it is.
I mean, I hear you.
It wouldn't even fix the problem that it's alleged to fix, which is to sort of heal America's soul on the issue of slavery. I don't even think it would do that. Let alone solve any of the problems.
But that's not what's alleged.
Exactly. But that's not what reparations is about.
That's fair. But Coleman, that's not what's being argued here, right? The reparations movement is not saying give Black people reparations to heal America's soul. I'm not particularly interested in America's soul. I'm interested in my pockets. I'm interested in my community. I'm interested in creating the capacity for Black wealth, for Black institutions.
Absolutely.
And so this isn't some abstract moral project for America or fight for America.
He's saying that it would not solve any of the problems.
The real issue here is, will this be a proper form of redress? If you take my money and I asked for it back, and you say, well, I would give your money back, but you're just going to spend it poorly anyway. You're still going to be broke after I give it back. That's not a persuasive argument for not giving me what's mine. The argument for reparations is that it's owed to us. This isn't an act of philanthropy or largesse. This isn't a favor. This is what is owed. And then after you give us what we owe, we will have the capacity to do what is
absolutely
what is best for our community. We'll have the opportunity to institution build, to produce intergenerational wealth, not in some sort of narrow capitalist way, but the idea that we can at least support one another, that we can build things for ourselves. And in doing so, that doesn't mean that we forfeit our citizenship. It doesn't mean that we're not still supposed to get safer neighborhoods. It doesn't mean that we're not supposed to get housing and health care. White people get that without reparations, right? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't get high quality schools. White people get that without reparations. The idea here is that reparations is to make us whole again, right? Or to at least attempt to repair the damage done. And you're right, maybe nothing will be complete. But the fact that it isn't perfect doesn't mean it shouldn't be done at all. I'm gonna give you the last word too. I wanna make sure you have an opportunity to respond to all.
We're not going to give him the last word. I'm going to get the last word. Thanks for listening. Mark Lamont Hill, 100% right on that last point. You know what I'm saying? That is not a convincing argument against reparations, you know. And he gave the perfect example. If you owe me money, you got to pay me the money. You can't be like, I'm not going to pay you the money because you're going to spend it on booze and all that. That's irrelevant. Doesn't matter if I stick that money up my, you know what? You owe it. Thanks for watching, everybody. I don't want to make this too long a video, but this is just some of my views. I'm going to continue harping on this topic every now and then with reparations. And anybody who's coming out against reparations, they're going to be right in my crosshairs. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, listen, share, like, all the good stuff. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Be good.